Chapter 1. Release your dogs, the referee said, as the men in the corners let go of their pit bulls. Standing on one side was of the wooden box ring was South Carolina native, Garrod Brown. He had tight-bred Chinaman dog Rex that had won 2 matches already and was going for his championship win. Solid black with just 1 speck of white in his chest, Garrod Dog was screaming to get loose before the ref gave the release command. On the opposite side of the ring was a guy from northern North Carolina that had a champion dog with a well-known reputation. A 50-50 cross between Tombstone and Bolio. A razor-sharp, well-conditioned pit name. Freddie wiggled in his owner's hands as he wanted to be released. Eyes wide open as the dogs met in the middle of the ring like 2 Amtrak trains, the spectators begin to choose sides. Fighting at 47 pounds for the first time, Rex took hold of Freddie's front leg near his ankle. Garrod normally matched Rex at 44, but felt like he could handle a 45-pound pit just as easy as the 44. And for the first 5 minutes, Rex was barreling into the shoulders and chest of the Bolio dog. The guy that handled Freddie was rather quiet at first, as it seemed his hound had finally met his match. But at about the 7-minute mark or the fight, Freddie took a devastating hold of Rex's back end. That's when his handler got on his knees and began to coach him. While pointing at Rex's kidney area, the handler got Freddie to take a gigantic bite into his side. Rex squealed in pain as Freddie shook his head with all of his strength. Realizing he was hurt, Freddie attempted to finish Rex off as he quickly shifted his grip to the lower neck area. Garrod never saw Rex being beat in this manner, as Freddie took what looked to be a death grip on Rex's throat. With $10,000 on the line, Garrod didn't want to pick his dog up and save his life, so he left Rex down in the center of the square ring to die. Holding a tight grip as Rex laid lifeless in his jaws, Freddie handler came up behind him as he pried his jaws loose with a plastic breaking stick. Picking him up and removing him from the ring, Freddie was taking the front yard where he was washed and dried off. Garrod handed Freddie's owner the cash while he was bragging about their now grand champion matchdog. Rex never moved again as Garrod picked him up out of the ring to lay him on the back of the truck. Freddie and his crew didn't stick around long, shaking everyone's hand before leaving. Riding with Garrod was his homeboys Ronald and Jazz. They usually helped him around his kennel, as well as helped him condition and buy dogs. They were just as surprised as Garrod was to see Rex handled so quickly. Not wanting to get pulled over with a dead dog on the back of the truck, Garrod pulled over in a wooded area and pulled Rex off the back of the truck, laying him out of eyesight. Jumping back inside his Silverado, Garrod made his way back to Horry County where he lived. Soon as he walked through the door, his wife Erica could tell by his facial expression that he had lost the match. "Where's Rex?" she asked while finishing up dinner. "He didn't make it," Garrod said as he walked in the back bedroom. Following him into the room, Erica wanted to know more about what happened. Rex was her favorite dog in the kennel, especially after he brought home a total of 20 grand between 2 fights. Erica wasn't fond of dogs at all until she met Garrod at a club in Florence, South Carolina a few years back. And after helping Garrod around the kennel here and there, she began to take liking of certain dogs on the yard. So to hear Rex had been killed was sad news to her as well. Sitting on the side of the bed with his head down, her man was more worried about finding another dog that could win money than the money he just lost. Later that evening, while cuddled on the couch with Erica, Garrod received a call from his boy Jazz. He found a guy in southern South Carolina that had some pit bulls that had a reputation of fighting for hours, off natural wind with no conditioning. When he heard the news, Garrod told Jazz to let the guy know they were coming to check his kennel out the next day. Although Garrod had other dogs on his yard, Rex was the best he had, and if Rex got demolished the way he did, it was time to regroup. The next morning, Garrod, Jazz, and Ronald were on the highway heading south from Lake City, going to Augusta, South Carolina, to see what kind of dogs the old man had to offer. When they arrived to the address they were giving, they drove up to a gate that stopped them from entering the property any further. Calling the old man on the phone, Jazz told him they were at his residence at the security gate. Then suddenly the 10-foot-high steel electric fence opened up, letting the boys inside. As they slowly drove down the driveway to the parking area, Garrod could see numerous dog houses off in the distance of his backyard. Their eyes were open wide as dollar pieces as they observed the scenery of the old man's yard. Exiting their car as the old man came out of his house, Jazz introduced himself, being he was the person that spoke with him on the phone. "James McElberry," the man said, as he reached out to shake the boys' hands. After properly introducing themselves, Garrod wanted to know what bloodline Mr. McElberry was running because he needed a new stud dog for his kennel. Walking into the large wood-gated backyard following behind the old man, Garrod's mouth dropped open when he saw how his kennel was set up. There was a light brown, or what is called buckskin male, with a big head at the front of the kennel entrance. "That's my old boy Mars right there. He's a pure red boy dog and one of my best studs on the yard," Mr. McElberry said as they continued to walk through. Finding out he was working the Frisco Chinaman dogs, Garrod knew the man. Dogs would be hard biters, but he wasn't sure how game the dogs were, because he heard so many stories about that strand of dog quitting in fights after about 45 minutes. Just like any other dog man, Mr. McElberry assured the boys his dogs were as game as they come. Walking past two black dogs, they reached a path that led to another, dark brown red-nosed pit bull. "This is the dog you're looking for right here, buddy. He is 75% red boy, and a quarter of that old Colby Blood," Mr. McElberry said. Standing in front of the energetic bulldog, Garrod looked closely at his physique, seeing muscles bulge from his shoulders. The dog was barking non-stop as if he knew the guys were talking about him. Reaching down to pet the exotic bulldog, it was looking like they were going to be taking him back to Horry County. Jazz wanted to look around at the rest of the dogs, claiming he needed a male ready to put in the box. While Jazz and Ronald strolled through the yard, Garrod and Mr. McElberry went inside his house to get the papers and registration for the dog that was named Deacon. Bulldog after bulldog, the guys walked past looking for that special one. When Garrod and the old man came back out the house, Jazz still hadn't found one he wanted to buy. As the old man took Deacon off the chain and passed the leash over to Garrod, the dog went crazy, snarling and growling as he attempted to get at any dog he was close to. He was friendly as it can be with people, and great with kids, but he would kill another animal. When they put him in the kennel crate on the back of the truck, the dog shook the box side to side as he tried to get out. Warning him not to let Deacon get close to any dog he cared for, Mr. McElberry stood in his yard waving the guys off as they drove away from his property. Chapter 2. While the guys were on their way back to Aner, South Carolina with Deacon, Garrod's girlfriend Erica was about to get a surprise at the house. Little did she know there were 3 guys in her backyard about to steal Garrod #1 producing bitch from the kennel. Not only were they trying to steal the dogs, they were breaking into the house as well to see what they could find of value laying around. Knowing the Garrod was gone out of town to buy a pit bull, the guys took their time making sure they got the right girl dog from the backyard before attempting to enter the house. The mastermind of the plan was named Larry. He was friends with Ronald. The night before the boys left to go see the Mr. McElberry, Ronald had told Larry he was riding out of town with Garrod to check out some dogs. But Ronald didn't think Larry was going to come steal Garrod's dogs. Hearing the dogs out back in the kennel barking like crazy, Erica thought one of the dogs must have gotten loose. So she walked to the back porch and looked out to the yard. She didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so she attempted to turn around and walk back inside the house, when suddenly Erica was grabbed from behind and put in the chokehold. "Don't move, bitch, or I will break your fucking neck," Larry said as the guys he was with entered the back door of the house. Scared to death, Erica tried kicking and fighting to get loose, but Larry was too strong for her to get free from his grip. Covering her mouth so she couldn't yell, he put his pistol to her neck so she could feel the cold steel on her skin, calming down so she wouldn't get killed. Erica begged for her life while in Larry's arms. Not staying in house but a few minutes, the other guys came out with a small bag with 4 pounds of kush inside. Pushing Erica down on the porch to her chest, Larry and his boys darted off into the woods where they had their car parked waiting. Not even realizing that the guys took any of the dogs, Erica went inside the house immediately, calling Garo to inform him what had just took place. Still hours away from home, Garrod told Erica to leave the crib and go to his sister's place until he got there. Driving as fast as he could without getting pulled over, Garrod's sweaty hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he made his way back to Ainur. When Garrod pulled up in his yard, he slammed on brakes, jumping out of the truck, leaving the door opened as thick weed smoke spots seeped from out the vehicle. Jazz and Ronald followed behind as they reached the backyard. Coming out his back door pissed because he was robbed for his entire stash, Garrod quickly went to the kennel to see his #1 bitch Nina had been stolen from her chain spot. "Yo, who the fuck knew we were leaving town?" Garrod yelled to Jazz and Ronald. Not mentioning he told Larry they were going to get a dog, Ronald kept his mouth shut. Jazz was just as pissed as Garrod was, being he spent so much time with the dogs. Taking Deacon off the back of the truck so he could bring him to the back with the rest of the pits, Jazz chained him up in Nina's old spot. Garrod went inside the house, grabbing his 9mm pistol from a well-stashed area, and told Jazz to ride with him. Ronald was claiming he had to go handle a few things, so he left in his car. Garrod didn't think anything of it, because Ronald wasn't about the street life. Driving around Ainur like a madman, Garrod called all his boys, informing them his dog was stolen, and he was offering a reward for her return. He never mentioned anything about being robbed as well, because whoever had the dog was the man he was looking for. While he was ripping and running through the countryside looking for his bulldog, Larry was in the outskirts of Georgetown, South Carolina, making money off the weed he took from Garrod and Erica. He wasn't into dogs and just stole Nina because he knew he could get big money for her. She was on a yard in Lake City, South Carolina, after being purchased by a guy named Sal. He was in the dog game deep, but didn't know Garrod, who was up and coming. Sal was a big-time dope dealer that had a reputation of putting 5 figures or better on his dog matches. He had a grand champion that was known to kill dogs in less than 30 minutes, named Bull. And although Sal didn't know Garrod had heard of Sal, and his champion dog being Lake City wasn't far from Ainur. Days had gone by and he still hadn't heard anything about his Nina. She was a pure red boy dog Garrod had purchased from an old dog man named Mr. Tenshaw. Garrod sold her puppies for $500 each every time she had a litter, but if he would have bred her to Deacon, he would get $1,500 easily. With all his weed gone and bills due, Garrod started thinking maybe buying Deacon wasn't the smartest thing to do. Chapter 3. While Garrod, Jazz, and Ronald were trying to find somebody to buy a few of the dogs off the yard to come back up, Erica was with one of her girlfriends, Megan, that just so happened to live in Lake City. Riding through the city as her stomach started to growl, Erica pulled over to McDonald's. At the same exact time, Megan received a call from her friend Tracy. She wanted Megan and Erica to stop by her house for a few minutes, claiming she wanted to show her something. Megan agreed, so after making sure their French fries were good and hot, they drove over to Tracy's place. Once they arrived on the other side of town, Erica pulled in Tracy's yard and parked. Seconds later, Tracy walked out the front door smiling from ear to ear. Getting out of the vehicle as she walked over to the car, Megan and Ursia was blinded by the sparkle from the ring on the finger. Tracy stuck out in their faces. Happy for her friend, Megan hugged her tightly as she congratulated her. This is where the game got interesting because Tracy's fiancé was Sal, the same Sal that had purchased Garrod's dog Nina from Larry. But the crazy part was that Erica thought she saw their dog Nina in the backyard, but she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. When she and Megan drove off, Erica couldn't stop thinking about the dog she saw from the distance. For the rest of the evening, Erica's thoughts kept drifting back to the dog she saw at Tracy's house. She never told Megan what was on her mind, but it was obvious that she was thinking about something deep. Back in Ainur, Garrod had come to the fact that he wasn't going to find Nina. After finding someone to buy 3 of his younger dogs, Garrod had enough money to get 5 pounds of triple OG Kush, which allowed him to pay his bills, his new dog. Deacon was acting great on the yard, and with cash flow steady coming back in, he was ready to find a match for his so-called killer. Later that night, while at home fixing dinner over the stove, Erica mentioned to Garrod about the dog she saw earlier that day. He thought it was far-fetched that it could be Nina, that his wife saw at Tracy House, but he wanted to know more. Calling her friend Megan to see what Tracy's fiancé name was, Erica found out it was the guy Sal Garrod had heard about with the killer dog from Lake City. His ears were open, and now he wanted to ride with his girl back to see the dog himself. The next morning, while he was out back feeding the dogs, Garrod received a call from his boy Ronald. "What's going on, bro? Did Randy call you?" he asked Garrod. "No, about what?" "He claimed some guys from Chesterfield, South Carolina, had a dog they wanted to fight at 50 pounds for 10 grand, Ronald stated. 10,000. Damn, I just got my bread back up. "Do you think he will go any lower?" Garrod asked. "I don't know, but I will ask the guy that told me about it." After getting off the phone with Ronald, Garrod walked over to Deacon, who was tied in the center of the yard, to pet him up. The dog was full of energy and ran his chain spot back and forth so much he was beginning to make a trench around the haze area. "You ready for some action, boy?" Garrod asked the red pit bull as he rubbed his head and chest, as if he could understand what his owner was asking of him. Deacon wagged his tail back and forth while he jumped up and down on the chain. He was the kind of dog that never stopped moving, it seemed. When all the dogs were fed up and watered, Garrod got in his car and went to his homeboy Jazz crib, which was a few miles away. Telling his boy what Erica told him, Garrod said he at least wanted to see the dog she was talking about. Jazz thought he was going on a wild goose chase, but was ready to roll to Lake City whenever he got ready. When Ronald finally called Garrod back about matching his dog into the boys from Chesterfield, he had good news. They agreed to match their dog for $7,500, claiming it would be easy money. Ronald told the guys they needed to come down that Saturday to lock it in and put down the forfeit for the fight. The forfeit is in case anyone can't make the match or their dog is overweight. In this case, the was putting up $2 grand. Although Garrod didn't know the guy he was fighting against, Ronald did so. He was trusting that his homeboy people were straight. That shouldn't be a problem for Deacon since Mr. McElberry told him the dog's game box weight was 50 pounds. And even though Garrod hadn't seen him fight at all, he had confidence in the old man's word. Not knowing a single thing about the Chesterfield boy's dog, Garrod told Ronald to see what he could find out about One the Hound so he could properly prepare. At the same time, Garrod was at Jazz's crib. Erica was sitting on the front porch of their house when a car passed she thought she recognized. 5 minutes went by and her brain was boggled because she couldn't figure out where she saw the car at before. Then she got up to go in the house and hit her like a freight train. That's the same car that passed by her house about 30 minutes before. She was robbed days ago. That freaked Erica out as she walked inside, closing the door behind her. Calling Garrod as she went in the kitchen, she peeped out of the blinds, but the car was gone. "Where are you?" she asked. "Garrod." Hearing the fear in his wife's voice, Garrod hurried back home, but the car never came back through by their crib the rest of the evening. Chapter 4. 8 weeks later, things were back to normal around Garrod's place. He was about to find out what his Deacon dog was all about. The Chesterfield boys came to town in 2 SUVs. Ronald had them to stop by his house and pick him up so they could meet up with Garrod and go to the spot the match was going down at. Grabbing $5 grand from his stash before leaving his house, Garrod had Jazz walk Deacon down the street to empty him out one last time. When they arrived at the match location, a few of Garrod's friends were standing around the empty pit, talking and smoking a blunt. Not wasting any time, both groups weighed and washed each other dogs as the rules implied. Deacon was weighing exactly 50 pounds. He was ripped from head to toe. Garrod and Jazz both spent time working. Deacon for the match throughout the weeks. Soon as the Chesterfield boys brought their dog near the box, Deacon began to scream. Garrod could barely hold him in his arms as he tried to keep him from getting excited. Deacon was focused on the other dog, like a missile locked in on his target. Handing the money to the referee as he stepped into the box, one of the Chesterfield boys held the dog they called Luke in the corner of the pit. Just like Deacon, He came in at the right weight, and the match was about to be on. As Garrod stepped over the wood box to enter the ring with Deacon in his arms, the dog Luke began to bark and attempt to break free from his handler. That made Deacon go crazy while Garrod gripped him tightly in the opposite corner. When the referee told the men to face their dogs, both hounds were ready for war. One of the guys with the Chesterfield crew blurted out from the outside of the ring, "Let's get that money, Luke." That's when the referee instructed both men to release their dogs. Deacon darted out of Garrod's hands, hitting Luke like a locomotive as he instantly grabbed the chest area of his opponent. Pushing his mouth deeper into Luke's chest as he shook with all his strength, Deacon backed him in the corner. Luke was a very smart dog, biting Deacon around the stifle, causing him to release his chest hold. Soon as Luke was free, he went to work on Deacon's face, shaking the top part of his nose while back paddling around the box. That lasted about 10 minutes as it was beginning to look like Deacon was getting frustrated that he could get Luke off of his nose. While the dogs were going at each other's throats for cash in Anor, Erica was in Florence, South Carolina doing some shopping. Stopping by the gas station before she came back home, Erica had to wait in line behind a guy who was buying lottery tickets. Getting a little impatient, she looked at her watch just before a tall, slender black guy walked in the store. Not paying the man attention, Erica took her phone from her pocketbook to see what Garrod was doing. At that very moment, the man standing behind her pulled a gun from his waist and attempted to rob the place. Telling everyone to empty their pockets, while demanding the cashier to empty the safe and register, the man waved the gun around loosely. Instead of getting the money like the robber said, the young Spanish cashier ducked behind the counter as he pulled a small handgun and began shooting. Erica fell to the floor as the man shot his gun back at the cashier. The smell of gunpowder filled the store as seconds felt like hours. Not looking while he steadily squeezed the trigger, the robber ducked behind one of the aisles for cover. The man playing the lottery tickets was shot in the back of the shoulder when the shootout first kicked off. Seeing his only way out was to grab a hostage, the man ran up behind Erica, taking her up from the floor. The cashier held his fire as the robber put his gun to Erica's head. Claiming he would blow her brains out if he moved, the man tried walking out the door using Erica as a shield, but the cashier wasn't about to let him escape. Pointing his firearm at the robber and shooting, the cashier tried hitting him while he had a clear shot but missed. The robber then aimed at the cashier, shooting multiple rounds in his direction. Screaming as bullets whistled past her head. Erica tried to break free but was held by her hair as the man made it to the doorway. Able to look into his piercing black eyes as she was manhandled, Erica tried one more time to rip her arm away, but was unsuccessful. That's when the cashier thought he had a clean shot and fired, hitting Erica in the chest. Seeing he hit the wrong person, the young cashier stopped shooting to duck behind the counter. The robber let Erica go as sleep fell to the floor in pain. He broke off, running out the door, and disappeared into the city. Looking over the counter to see blood starting to puddle around the young lady, the cashier called 911 while trying to keep her awake. At the same time, about 50 miles away in Anor at the dogfight, things were looking bad for Garrod and his Deacon dog. The Chesterfield boys' dog Luke had took total control of the fight since the 45-minute mark. Luke was biting Deacon so hard you could hear the grit sound of his teeth grinding against the bone. At times, Deacon would scream out while Luke was going to work on his legs, and although he was getting the shit beat out of him, each time Deacon came out the corner like he had a point to prove. When Garrod looked at his watch again, they were 1 hour and 20 minutes into the match. Deacon had holes in his shoulders that you could stick your thumb inside, but he was hanging in there with the brindle brown dog from out of town. After making a great handle grabbing his dog, taking him in the corner, Garrod tried to cool Deacon down because he was starting to overheat. It was his scratch, but Luke was in his corner, appearing to be finished as he sat still between his owner's legs. When the referee told the guys to face their dogs, neither pit made a move toward the other. It didn't matter if Luke came out or not because it was Deacon's time to prove his gameness. Soon as Garrod released him to cross the line, Deacon fell to his face. He was more tired than all outdoors. Panting hard as he tried to take in fresh, clean air, Deacon gazed across the box at Luke, who was calmly sitting in his handler's hands. The referee started counting and was at 4 of a 10 count when Deacon heard Garrod screaming for him to get up. With all the strength in his back legs, the dog, Mr. Mackelberry said, was game pushed his way across the box. Too tired to stand more than a second on his front legs, Deacon lounged at Luke, knocking him back against the wall in the corner. He made his scratch, and now it was Luke's turn. Seeing he was finished, Deacon gathered some energy to squeal in the corner, wanting to be released at Luke. And when the referee instructed the guy to release, Luke the pit bull turned away in an attempt to leave the fight. Picking the exhausted Deacon up and handing him to Jazz as he collected the cash from the referee, Garrod shook the Chesterfield boy's hands before blurting out, "It was nice doing business with you." Putting their dog back in his crate so they could leave, he saw he had a missed call from Erica. But when he tried to call her back, she didn't pick up the phone. Little did Garrod know, but his celebration would be short-lived, because while he was cleaning Deacon off to put him back on the chain, his wife was in a Florence gas station bleeding out on the floor. The ambulance had finally arrived at the gas station, and the paramedics were doing their best to revive Erica, who was unconscious. The officers on the scene were interrogating the cashier while getting the camera footage of the robbery. Holding her cell phone in his hand, one of the cops answered when the contact name read Hubby across the screen. It was Garrod, and when he heard the voice of a man answer his lady's phone, it instantly sparked a flame. But when the man speaking from Erica's phone said he was a Florence County police officer, and the woman that owned that phone had been shot in a gas station robbery attempt. Not believing what he was hearing, Garrod asked the cop, was she still alive? But the officer just told him that he needed to go to Florence McLeod Regional Hospital. Hanging up the phone as his heart dropped into his stomach, Garrod grabbed his car keys off the dresser and left his house speeding towards Florence. Sweat dripped down the side of his head, while his sweaty hands gripped the steering wheel ever so tightly. It was like a bad dream trying to keep calm when the love of your life was shot in another city. It took Garrod a little over 15 minutes to reach the hospital, where he parked and jumped out the car, running towards the entrance. His blood pressure was elevating and his legs felt like they were getting too heavy to lift as he stormed through the front doors into the lobby. Chapter 5. Finding out Erica was in surgery at the time he left the receptionist desk, Garrod could do nothing but wait in the lobby. After calling Jazz and Ronald while he was waiting to see the doctors, his boys said they were on the way to the hospital. Both of Erica's parents were dead, but she treated her Aunt Darlene like she was her mother, so Garrod called her as well. It wasn't long before she ran through the doors of the hospital emergency entrance into the lobby where Garrod was sitting. His eyes were filled with water, causing Darlene to think the worst as she yelled out, "She's not dead, is she? Where's my niece?" Darlene started getting loud in the lobby, demanding to see her niece, but she had to wait just as Garrod did. Before the doctor came out of the operating room, Garrod and Darlene were visited by two plainclothes detectives. Explaining that they had an APB out on the guy that tried to rob the store, the officers tried to comfort the pair in the lobby as they waited. Then suddenly a man who appeared to be a doctor came walking towards the lobby. "Are you the family of Ms. Williams?" he asked Garrod and Darlene as he stood in front of them. "Yes, she is my wife, and this is her aunt," Garrod answered. Soon as the doctor said the word, unfortunately, Darlene started crying out. Erica didn't make it due to heart failure, which was caused by the large .40 caliber bullet that ripped through her flesh and muscle. Feeling lightheaded, Garrod leaned back in his chair to keep from falling forward. Darlene buried her head in Garrod's chest as she cried her heart out. My only niece, she said repeatedly, as Garrod held her in his arms. Unable to soak in what the doctor had just told him, Garrod trembled in anguish as his friends Jazz and Ronald came through the hospital doors. The bad news hit them just as hard as Jazz claimed he needed to take a walk to get some air. It was killing him to see his boy in that situation, knowing how happy Erica and Garrod were together. After leaving the hospital that night, Garrod sat in his house alone, grieving over his love. He wasn't a drinker, but he tried drowning his pain with a half-pint of whiskey. Jazz, Ronald, and numerous friends tried calling to comfort him in his loss, but he wouldn't answer the phone. Holding a picture of Erica in his hand, as tears dropped onto the glass picture frame, Garrod yelled out to the Lord for help. Drowning in drunkenness, he began to talking to himself. And when he attempted to get up from the couch, highly intoxicated, he stumbled forward, losing his balance and hitting the floor. The sound of someone banging on his door is what woke him up the next morning. Still laying on the floor, Garrod, slowing, made his way to his feet. His head was hurting from all the alcohol he consumed the night before. And when he opened the door, Jazz was on his porch with another bottle of liquor in his hands. "What's up, bro? You okay? Motherfucker's been calling you since last night," he said as Garrod led him inside the house. "Nah, man, I'm fucked, you. No need for me to lie. Some crackhead-ass nigga took my wife from me," Garrod blurted as he flopped down on the sofa. Smelling the alcohol reeking from his skin and the empty bottle on the floor, Jazz could see his boy didn't need any more to drink. He tried talking to Garrod but only got hard stares and cold silence. Realizing he wasn't leaving the house or being social, Jazz decided to leave and come back later. While he sat alone in his house, Garrod couldn't stop thinking about all the good times he and Erica had while she was living. Nothing mattered to him anymore. And for the first time in his life, he felt helpless and left for dead. As the days went by, Erica was buried. The weeks following her funeral were extra hard for Garrod, who was starting to feel like he was breaking down mentally. The only thing that even made sense to him was spending time with his dogs. He was beginning to see the real meaning of why dogs are considered man's best friend. Deacon had healed up from the fight against Luke and was looking good on his chain as he jumped up and down, wagging his tail. After telling Mr. McElberry how the dog he sold him won his first match, Garrod had to tell him the bad news about his wife. Although the old man didn't know Erica, he gave Garrod his condolences. He explained to Garrod how his wife died years back and left him an emotional wreck. He and Garrod spoke for hours. And when Mr. McElberry was done, Garrod was feeling a little better inside. One Saturday, not long after his wife passed away, Garrod got a call from Erica's cousin, Shamela. She was in town from Miami, Florida, and wanted stop by being she hadn't seen him in so long. Straighten up the house a bit before she arrived, he figured she was with her husband as before. But when Shamela knocked on his front door, she was alone. And when he swung his door open, his deceased wife's caramel complexion, thick hips, with a fat-ass cousin was looking into his eyes. "Well, can I come inside?" she asked. For the first 15 minutes after coming inside the house, she didn't mention her dead cousin once. Claiming she and her husband were on the outs, Shamela asked Garrod could she stay there for a few days until things blew over. Insisting she would stay out of his way, she said divorce was intimate for her. And after she told Garrod everything she caught her husband doing, he was surprised, especially since Shamela's man didn't seem like the type to do what he did. And after a long conversation, she was granted access to the back bedroom where she took her suitcase. While Garrod was cooking something quick to eat, Shamela took a shower and came into the living room, dressed rather loosely. Wearing a pink t-shirt that stopped at her Coke bottle hips, her boy shorts had no problem arousing Garrod as he stood over the stove. "What are you, some type of dog breeder or something?" she asked as he walked in the kitchen. "Well, I got a few." "Nigga, you got more than a few. When I got out the car, it sounded like you had a dog shelter in your backyard," she responded. "What, you don't like dogs?" he asked. "Nah, actually, I love dogs. What breed do you have?" "Oh, let me guess, pit bulls." "You know it." "Do you fight your dogs?" Shamela asked, looking him directly in his eyes. "Nah, I don't do any fighting," Garrod answered, knowing he was lying his ass off. Sitting at the table as they ate, Garrod was getting the feeling that Shamela was pushing up on him. How could she be in her dead first cousin house and not even give her condolences one time? It was like she didn't care or was waiting for her opportunity at her cousin man. Although she had a I don't give a damn attitude. She did ask Garrod not to let their Aunt Darlene know she was staying over there, claiming she would tell her husband where she was, and he would come looking for her. Shamela said she didn't want to see him anymore. Garrod didn't want to get involved with her marriage problems, but he knew if Erica was living, she would let Shamela stay at their house. After eating, Garrod poured up a glass of wine for the both of them, as the conversation led deep into the night. Chapter 6. About 3 o'clock in the morning, while he was hard asleep, Garrod was awakened by the sound of dogs barking. Hurrying out of his bed while grabbing his .38 Special, he went to the back door. Quietly opening the door as he stepped out on his patio, Garrod could see the dogs at the back of the kennel, barking at something or someone in the woods. Shamela was still asleep in the bed while he was creeping behind his shed to get a better look at what the dogs were barking at. That's when it happened. Someone jumped the fence and attempted to grab one of the dogs of the chain. "Yo, what the fuck you doing?" Garrod yelled as he aimed his gun. Stopping in his tracks when he heard a voice, the man let go of the dog collar, pulling a handgun from his waist as he tried to jump the fence to escape. Firing one shot from his revolver that was aimed at the man as he jumped back into the shadows, Garrod ran into the kennel entrance. By that time, the guy stealing the dog was nowhere to be found. He vanished into the woods empty-handed. Garrod checked all his dogs, making sure they were there before going back into the house. As he passed through the den area, he was met in the hallway by Shamela, who was wearing red laced lingerie. "What's going on? I heard gunshots," she asked, standing in front of Garrod as her hard wearing. Explaining that someone was trying to steal dogs from the kennel, Garrod didn't give Shamela the attention she seemed to have wanted as he went to his bedroom. Calling his boy Jazz to tell him about the dog thief, Garrod laid back on his pillow as he flipped through the television channels. Just as his eyes were about to close shut, he heard the sound of his room door opening. It was Shamela. Walking towards his bed as her oily brown skin glistened off the light from the TV, Garrod could see she had other motives. "What's up? You know you don't need to be in here," he asked as she climbed into his bed, putting her finger over his lips. Not saying much more as she gently brushed her tongue around his belly button, Garrod closed his eyes while Shamela gave him a surprise he wasn't expecting. The next morning when Garrod woke up, Shamela wasn't in the bed. Lying under his super comfy blanket watching television, he figured she went back in the back bedroom, but when he finally got up, he realized she had left the house. Her car was gone and she wasn't answering her phone. Thinking she may have had a change of heart and went back to her husband, Garrod closed the door and went back to bed. Later the afternoon, while out picking up a few bags of dog food, Garrod was approached by a man from behind. It was Shamela's husband, Carl. "What's up, big dog? How you been?" he asked with a rather serious look on his face. "Can't complain, my man. How's the family?" Garrod asked. "Everything is good. Everyone is well," Carl responded, appearing as if he desperately wanted to tell Garrod something. Besides what came from his mouth, Carl gave him a stiff dap and hard gaze as he turned and walked away. After leaving the store, Garrod decided to stop by his boy Jazz's crib, and although he had a wet night with Shamela, things weren't adding up right. He noticed how Carl was sizing him up and the harsh looks he gave him. He was getting the feeling Shamela's husband knew she was at his house last night, and she still wasn't answering her cell phone. Problems with Carl is what Garrod didn't want. Carl was a big-time player from North Charleston, South Carolina. He was connected with some heavy dope boys from Panama City, Florida. Word was that they would kill anyone that got in the way of their money, and Carl was their #1 money man in South Carolina. So Garrod knew if he found out his lady was getting smashed the night before, Carl would have him killed. When he told his boy Jazz what happened the night before, he warned Garrod that he was playing on dangerous ground and needed to watch Carl. Hearing how Carl approached Garrod in the store, Jazz knew that wasn't the last time they would see him. Changing the subject, Garrod started talking about the kennel and how good Deacon looked in his match against the Chesterfield boys. Jazz agreed and thought they should start looking for his second match, being he didn't suffer any major injuries from the match with Luke. Seeing how game, Deacon was Jazz was willing to put 10 grand of his own money up for his next fight. Getting up with their partner Ronald, the boys decided to have a cookout at Garrod Place on the back patio. Jazz invited a few ladies as well as some guys he knew from Conway and Myrtle Beach. Ronald was doing the cooking while Garrod was handling in a few things around the yard that needed to be tended to. Just as the smell over barbecue began to reek in the air, the boys got the first guest, but it wasn't who they was expecting. Stepping out of her red Maxima dress to kill was Shamela. And she wasn't alone because getting out of the passenger seat was a model-shaped, pretty brown-eyed chick named Kayla. She was from North Carolina but moved down to Myrtle Beach a few years ago. Best friends, the girls walked up the steps to the porch to knock on the front door as the scent of good eating was creeping into their nostrils. "Damn, it smells like someone is cooking good," Kayla said to Shamela. On the back patio, Garrod and the boys didn't know they had company on the front porch. And after no one came to the door, Shamela decided to walk around back to see if Garrod was at his dog kennel. "I see we showed up at the right time," Shamela said, as she stepped up onto the back patio. Surprised to see her back again, Garrod grabbed a couple porch chairs, sitting them out for the ladies. Never seeing her friend Kayla before, Shamela introduced her to Garrod, Jazz, and Ronald. Unlike Shamela, her friend Kayla had something in common with Garrod. She was the girlfriend of a big-time dogfighter in North Carolina, so she loved pit bulls. It wasn't long before a few of Jazz's friends pulled up with a couple bottles of Remy Martin and whiskey. The party was just about to crank up when Kayla thought she saw Shamela's boyfriend, Carl's car pass by Garrod House and turn the curb. Hearing that had Shamela paranoid, looking over her shoulders as if she just robbed a bank. She never said anything to the boys about who Kayla thought she saw. And at the end of the night, when everyone was half drunk, stomachs full and about to leave, Shamela was scared to drive away from the house. She never saw her husband's car with her own eyes, but she had a gut feeling that he was somewhere close by, waiting for her to leave. And her intuitions were right, because soon as she and Kayla were out of sight of Garrod's house, she saw a car speeding up behind her in the rearview mirror. Her heart raced as the lights got closer and closer. Unable to outrun the car without getting in a wreck herself on the curvy roads, Shamela let off the gas, reducing her speed down to 45 miles per hour. Then suddenly the car behind her attempted to pull up beside their vehicle. That's when she got a clear look at the car. It was Carl, and he appeared to be pissed off. Looking over at his car as the passenger window rolled down, Shamela locked eyes with her husband. Fire burned in his pupils like oil in the Iraqi deserts. At that moment, Shamela tried speeding past him but ran off the road into the woods. Chapter 7. Radiator busted. The girls lay dazed in the badly wrecked car. There were no other cars on the road besides them, and Carl was hitting a U-turn just up the street to come back and finish them off. When he pulled up, Carl jumped out of his car with his pistol in his hand. He calmly walked over to the car, being careful not to get burnt by the water gushing out the radiator. "This just ain't our lucky day," he said to Kayla, who was dazed on the passenger side. Aiming his pistol at her skull, Carl called out to the girl to get her attention. Barely able to move her head, Kayla looked at him, then looked away. "Bitch, I never liked your whore ass anyway," Carl said, as he squeezed the trigger twice. Falling over in the seat as blood flowed from her head, like the Niagara Falls, Kayla died instantly. Carl ran to the driver's side and opened the door, taking Shamela from her seat. Unable to stand on her own, Carl helped his injured wife to the passenger seat of his car and drove off. Shamela was so out of whack, she didn't know where she was at when she did come to her scenes. A tad bit, she was too weak to do anything but moan. While Carl was taking Shamela to who knows where, Jazz and Ronald were cleaning things up around the house. Garrod thought it was odd the girls weren't answering their phones, so he continued to call long after his friends left, but only got the operator. When Jazz and Ronald rolled out, they didn't even notice Shamela's car wrecked in the shadows of the dark on the side of the road. Kayla's body laid in the front seat as rigmarole stiffened her limbs. Not even the cars riding down the road throughout the night spotted the badly damaged vehicle at the edge of the woods. The road was so dark, and the car was in the woods just far enough for the rear lights to be covered by the bushes. The next morning, Garrod was up early when he noticed a police car pass by his crib. By the time he made it to his front door, another patrol car passed by his place. Thinking the cops were going to the neighborhood miles down the street that was known to be a crack spot, Garrod realized he was wrong when he backed out his yard and saw flashing lights a little over a mile past his house. Having to drive in that direction anyway, he slowly made his way down the street, approaching the emergency vehicles. Cops were everywhere. Some were around the car in the woods, while others were walking along the side of the street looking for clues. Driving slow enough to look off into the woods where the wrecked car was, is when Garrod could see the back of Shamila's Dodge Charger. "What the fuck?" he said under his breath as he passed by the scene. Soon as Garrod turned the corner and was away from the cops, he pulled over at the gas station and called Jazz. "Yo, man, I just passed a Shamela car in the woods with yellow tape around it. Dog, it was so many cops out there, and I'm dirty so I couldn't stop," he said. "Bro Shorty was saying something about Shamela had to leave because of some crazy shit. She really didn't go into details, but I know it probably had something to do with her husband," Jazz responded. It didn't take long to come to the conclusion that things had gone horribly to the left. Garrod tried once more to reach Shamela's cellular, but it was turned off. Later that afternoon, while he and Jazz were out in the kennel vaccinating all the dogs, Garrod received a call from a private number. When he answered, nobody said anything. Although he could hear a little rumbling in the background, nobody said a thing. Then suddenly, whoever was on the other line hung up the phone in his ear. Unable to concentrate after he received that phone call, Garrod went inside the house arming himself with his pistol before coming back out to finish the kennel work. And after he told his boy about his strange and stalkerish phone call, Jazz was ready to go out and find Carl. Although he wasn't for sure about who was on the other end of that creepy call, he knew it had to be Carl, or someone he was affiliated with. But unlike his friend, who wanted to load up the guns and go hunting, Garrod wanted to lay low as if he was running from someone. Staying around his crib for the remainder of the evening, Garrod kept his pistol close. Jazz left, insisting he come along, but the boy wanted to play close to home plate. Chapter 8. The Jook. With his wife being murdered in a gas station robbery, Garrod could only imagine what had become of her cousin Shamela. The local authorities put up a $1,000 reward, which was announced on the news, for anyone who had information that would lead to an arrest. A couple weeks had passed, and tension was still in the atmosphere. Things weren't the same around the house for Garrod as he tried to make sense of everything that had unfolded. Some say time heals wounds, but this was a wound that would leave a permanent scar. Having to take a litter of pups to the vet, Garrod decided to stop by Ronald's place on his way back home. As he pulled in the driveway, he noticed a black Chevy parked on the side of the house. Ronald must have gotten a new whip, Garrod thought to himself as he walked up the steps to the front door. Taking longer than normal to answer, when the door did swing open, it wasn't Ronald letting him inside. It was Larry. Yes, the same Larry that robbed Garrod for his dog Nina and the pounds of exotic. Garrod didn't know Larry, and Ronald didn't know his boy. Larry had robbed Garrod. "Damn, I'm glad you stopped through. I needed to holla at you about Deacon," Ronald blurted out as he continued fixing on the kitchen ceiling fan. "Man, I told them boys he wasn't for sale," Garrod quickly responded. With his guards down, not expecting any bad company at Ronald's place, he began a deep conversation about his future plans for Deacon. Larry wasn't a dog man, but had a few things to say about some of his friend's pit bulls. At this point, Larry was side-taking, trying to get info about the lines Garrod had without making himself look suspicious. Ronald was connected to some guys that were well known in New York dog circuit and wanted to bring their dog to the south to catch wreck. There was only one problem. Their dog was a little lighter than Garrod's dog Deacon. Ronald explained that the guys wouldn't budge on the weight and would bet any amount they could afford. This meant Garrod would have to drop Deacon into the 48 pounds. This wouldn't be an impossible task, but Mr. McElberry told Garrod Deacon was a natural 50-pounder. Needless to say, he insisted Ronald set up the show, claiming the up north boys don't know what a bulldog looked like. The entire time while speaking his opinion, Larry was plotting on Ronald and Gerard. Ronald didn't know Larry long. In fact, he only knew him for a few months after meeting him at a local high school basketball game. Only knowing one side of a man with many faces, Ronald had no idea Larry was in the streets. As far as he knew, Larry was a party promoter. Gerard didn't stay long, realizing he had to get the pups back to the house, but the damage was done. Larry had enough info about Deacon's next match. Against the New York boys, being Ronald did everything but lock in a forfeit, while Gerard was at his house. A month had gone by since speaking to the guys upstate, and Gerard was ready to set the match date. Deacon was cleaned out for worms and any other parasite that could hinder his performance in the coming weeks. And although Jared didn't hear anything from his new adversary Carl, he was still on point. While Gerard was taking advantage of the down south spring heat by working his dog during the hottest part of the day, his homeboy Jazz was about to find himself in a sticky situation. Unlike Gerard and Ronald, who worked a regular 9-to-5 job, Jazz had his foot in the streets. And while his boy was putting unbelievable air in Deacon, Jazz was plotting on a guy that had just moved to the city from Georgia named Mike. Hearing he had the connect with uncut pink Peruvian cocaine, Jazz had a mutual friend, Brian, to place an order for 36 ounces, which is a kilo and no chump money. "What the fuck is taking this nigga so long?" Jazz asked Brian while sitting low in the front passenger seat of a black Audi. Before he could respond, a red Porsche 911 pulled into the parking lot. It was Mike, but he wasn't alone. Brian was unaware to what Jazz had planned and thought he genuinely wanted to buy a load of the best shit in town. Adrenaline flowing through his veins stronger than the Mississippi River, Jazz watched both men exit the red sports car and begin walking over to the Audi. "Who's the other nigga?" Jazz asked. "I don't know, but he gotta be cool if he's with Mike." Brian quickly answered. Due to the fact the guy was wearing a COVID mask, he couldn't be recognized by either of the men. And as they got closer to the car, Jazz was getting a gut feeling. Things weren't right. Before he could react to his intuitions, the guy wearing the COVID mask rushed to the passenger door, quickly pulling a Glock from his waist. "Yeah, fuck boy, get up out the car," he said, while aiming his pistol at Jazz through the window. He was caught lacking, and even though he had his gun, he couldn't pull it with the wrong end of a Glock within inches of his face. Immediately holding his hands up, the tables had just turned against the rabbit, and as he looked over his left shoulder, what he saw next let him know he was in a world of trouble. Brian had exited the driver's side of the Audi just before shaking hands with Mike. "I told you he would be easy," Brian blurted before grabbing a brown paper bag filled with cash. Snatching open the passenger door, the man wearing the COVID mask roughly grabbed Jazz around his shirt collar, slamming him to the ground. Looking up from the concrete as blood dripped from his mouth, Jazz begged for his life. "Stop acting like a bitch," the man blurted as he began to remove the mask that covered his true identity. "Shit, Carl," Jazz mumbled under his breath. While he was trying to rob the dope man, his boy Brian gave him up after hearing about the money in the streets for their capture. "Get up and get back in the car," Carl demanded. Jazz keeping the gun on him from the back seat of the Audi. Getting back into the driver's seat as Mike ran back to the porche, Brian drove off as Carl repeatedly chopped Jazz behind the head with the pistol. While his boy was being kidnapped and driven to Charleston, Gerard was in Anor taking Deacon back to his chain spot when his iPhone began to ring. Seeing the number was marked private, he put his phone back on the table and continued his yard work. Roanold played close to Gerard during the weeks of conditioning. Deacon. And guess what? Larry was right there tagging along. He was acting as if he'd never been to Gerard House before, knowing he had just robbed Erica and stole his dog Nina months before. He was even helping with the road work. Days had gone by and neither of the guys had heard anything from Jazz. And that wasn't normal, being he called Gerard on a daily basis. Needless to say, days turned to weeks and the showtime date was creeping up fast. Deacon was looking crisp and full of natural energy. and the guys were ready for what they thought would be an easy match. Still grieving over his tragic loss, Gerard met a woman named Sarah at the grocery store and made plans to meet her at the steakhouse in Myrtle Beach later that evening. And when 7 p.m. rolled around on his citizen watch, Gerard was turning into the parking lot of the restaurant. Chapter 9. Something smells fishy. Screams of pain echoed through a low-lighted abandoned house in Charleston as Carl swung the Louisville Slugger, hitting a badly beaten Jazz in his already broken hand. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jazz yelled, while Carl continued beating him senseless. "Maybe he's telling the truth, see?" Mike stated as he stood back in the doorway of the room. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Where's my shit?" Carl yelled just before knocking Jazz. Completely unconscious, what Carl didn't know was that Jazz had no idea what he was ripping and raving about. To make a long story short, Carl's wife Shamela ran off with his load of heroin. Once Carl tracked her down at Gerard's place, he linked Gerard and his friends to his missing drugs. And when it came to killing for what he believed in, Carl would pull the trigger with no hesitation. He's the kind of guy you don't want on your bad side. Coughing up blood as he came back to his senses, Jazz continued pleading his innocence while begging for his life. But no matter how convincing he sounded, Carl was stuck on the fact that his wife spent several days at Gerard's place, so all through the night the beating continued. The next afternoon, over 100 miles away in Myrtle Beach, Gerard and Sarah, Ronald, and his wife Sabrina were out on the town having dinner when Sabrina's cell phone rung. It was one of her friends that had agreed to watch their 4-year-old son, little Ronald, for a few hours. Diagnosed with a bad heart, little Ronald was on the waiting list to get a transplant, and that's never a quick process. Informing Sabrina that her son was fast asleep, Tisha suggested they not rush back and enjoy themselves. Over the next few days, Gerard and Ronald were making sure Deacon was ready for his upcoming show. Muscles ripped like Lance Armstrong, but without the juice, Deacon was ready for action. While the guys were finishing Deacon's conditioning program, their opposition was upstate New York, with a dog named Ranger hanging from a digital scale. Owned by native New Yorker Sydney, Ranger was a champion going for his 5th win. He had stopped all 4 dogs in less than 45 minutes combined, so Sydney was overconfident that he would stop the dog down south in the same fashion. Plus the fact that his kennel partner was the famously known Paul Jacobs, Sydney was certain things would fall in their favor when it was all said and done. Back in South Carolina, with less than 48 hours left until the dogs were to meet in the box, Gerard was enjoying one hell of a day starter breakfast prepared by Sarah when he saw Ronald's car pull in his driveway. Things were about to get heated. Explaining that Carl called his phone 30 minutes before bragging about how he had Jazz in an uncompromising situation, terror was written across Ronald's face. "I could hear Jazz screaming in the background," Ronald blurted out to Gerard as he got up from the kitchen table walking to his bedroom. Sarah had no idea what was going on due to the fact that Gerard never told her about his deceased wife Erica's cousin and the drama that followed her, and he wanted to keep it that way. Coming out the bedroom stating he would return shortly, Gerard left with Ronald so they could speak freely. Completely confused about the large amount of heroin Carl claims he is missing, the guys drove back to Myrtle Beach to hopefully get more clarification from one of Jazz's friends. Just so happened, the one particular friend that Ronald knew was Brian. But when they spoke to him, he claimed he hadn't seen his boy in over a week. Seemingly hitting a dead end, the guys left heading back towards Aner. "What the hell is Carl talking about?" Gerard frustratingly asked Ronald as they tried to make sense of the situation. "My guess is as good as yours, man. This shit got me fucked up," Ronald replied. "Shamela never said anything about any kind of drugs when she came around," Gerard continued. "Man, tell me the truth because I'm lost." "Did you get his dope from Shamela?" Ronald asked as he looked Gerard in his eyes, waiting on an answer. "Fuck no dog. I wouldn't deal with that stuff if she did show it to me," Gerard blurted out. Before Ronald could respond, his Samsung Galaxy began to chime. The number was private, so he figured it was Carl calling again. He was right, but this time Carl had a different message, claiming if his dope wasn't returned soon, Their boy Jazz would meet his demise and he would come for them next. Passing the phone over to Gerard as he punched the dashboard, Ronald yelled out in anger. "Yo, man, what is your problem? What are you talking about? Your wife never gave me any drugs," Gerard said as he clinched the cell phone tightly. "You're a fucking lie," Carl yelled out. At the same time, Gerard could hear the sounds of someone being beaten in the background. And suddenly the call ended. Thinking back to when Shamela came to his place, Gerard tried to backtrack her actions, hoping he could come up with an answer. But just like when they asked Jazz's friend Brian, it was just another dead-end street. Only having 24 hours before he was to meet the New York guys Sidney and Paul Jacobs, Gerard tried to focus on Deacon and his money. His new girlfriend Sarah could tell something was bothering him, but he never told her anything. It was to the point that Gerard didn't know where Carl drugs were and had no idea where Jazz was being held. His only option was to focus on Deacon and bringing him out his match victorious. Chapter 10. Untold Secrets. It was Saturday morning, and the show between Deacon and Ranger was to take place at 7:00 p.m. that evening. Gerard, with the help of Mr. Mackelberry, made arrangements for the action to go down on one of his friend's property. Claiming she had to work a few hours at her father's store that morning, Gerard's girlfriend Sarah left the house as Ronald was turning into the driveway. Before Sarah could get off the main street where Gerard stayed, the sound of her cell phone startled her as her mind had drifted off into space. Not answering but holding her phone up to see who was calling, Sarah received a message across the screen that read, "Are we ready?" in which she responded back, "I will talk to you later." Sarah was a stunning, perfectly figured, brown-eyed brunette that was 2 years past on getting her master's degree. Originally from New Jersey, her family moved to Myrtle Beach while she was just a young girl. She graduated Myrtle Beach High and later enrolled in the University of South Carolina. When Sarah arrived at her dad's store, she received another text that read, "Is it a go?" She quickly responded no before walking to the back of the store to put her pocketbook in the office. Sarah's dad wasn't gone 30 minutes before she received another text, but this time it was from Gerard. He was letting her know he was loading his dog Deacon up on the truck to head down to the Augusta area where Mr. Mackelberry lived. Gerard never spoke about fighting dogs around Sarah, but did mention his good friend Mr. Mackelberry in a few of their conversations, especially how Mr. Mackelberry helped him during his time of grief. Texting him back, insisting he drive safe on the highway, Sarah walked to the entrance, locking the door before heading back to the office. Once she was certain she was alone, Sarah decided it would be the best time to call Brad back. At that very exact moment in Charleston, Carl put the barrel of his polymer pistol in Jazz's mouth while asking, "Can you take me to my shit?" Too weak to hold his head up without help, Jazz uttered no, and Carl squeezed the trigger out, blowing bloody brain tissue all over the table and floor. "2 down and 2 to go," Carl said as he cautiously left the abandoned house without being seen. With blood splatter still on his clothes, Carl jumped in his car heading to Anor, South Carolina, with hopes of catching Gerard or Ronald. While he was on the highway coming to Horry County searching for his drugs or death, the guys, after picking up Larry, were on the highway heading to Mr. Mackelberry Place in Augusta. Yes, the same Larry that has been plotting on Gerard the entire time was heading to the match off the strength of Ronald, but Ronald being Ronald, and always in the blind, he didn't recognize a move being made on him by his so-called boy Larry. Unlike their competition Deacon and the guys who only had a 3-hour ride to Mr. Mackelberry Place, Sidney and Paul Jacobs had a 13-hour ride with Ranger. So being the inexpert in his field, Paul Jacobs had Sidney to drive down to South Carolina a day before, in which he was waiting in a hotel in Augusta until he got the word from Gerard. Knowing the show would be at 7 o'clock, Paul had Sidney call Gerard about 5 o'clock, informing him they had just arrived in Augusta and was ready to meet up. It was 6:30 when the guys all arrived at Mr. Mackelberry's friend property, where the match would take place. And at 7 o'clock the guys were facing each other in the box just as they planned. Deacon had all his focus on Ranger, who was trying to wiggle his way out of Paul Jacobs' hands. Mr. Mackelberry's friend had a guy he knew that agreed to referee the match since he had no ties to either dog. The purse was at 15 grand when Sidney spoke out. "Is that all you country boys can afford on that great dog of yours?" Mr. Mackelberry had added 5 grand to Gerard 10 to make the 15 grand purse, so they were sat with their bets. While Gerard neither Mr. Mackelberry added any money, there were several people on the side that wanted to bet their cash on the impressive-looking Deacon dog. Ranger pulled his share of side bets as well in the crowd of about 100 people. Making sure both guys in the corners were ready, the referee looked at the boys saying, "Release your dogs." Deacon was going for his second, while Ranger was going for his 5th win. And met in the center of the ring, both dogs immediately went into their styles, with Deacon catching Ranger at his ankle as he tried to dive into Deacon's rear end. In a very crucial area at the beginning of the match, Deacon shook Ranger's ankle profusely, seeming as if he was trying to rip it away from the rest of the leg. "Break that shit, boy," Gerard yelled quietly to Deacon as he kept his hold, keeping Ranger off balance. Maintaining a firm grip on the front foot area, Deacon released his hold, allowing Ranger to finally put all 4 feet on the ground, and he was pissed. Ranger immediately grabbed Deacon on the side of the head as he began to push forward. "That a boy! That a boy!" Paul Jacobs said as Ranger continued to dig in the side of Deacon's neck. Not staying in one area too long, Ranger soon went to the rear end of the Carolina dog, putting 2 finger-sized holes in Deacon's thigh. "Y'all better stop it! Y'all better stop it! He about done!" Sidney yelled from the side as Ranger went in for the kill by grabbing the bottom of Deacon's throat. Unable to hold that grip long, Ranger released his hold to get another, but Deacon had took control by grabbing Ranger deep in his ribcage. At the 20-minute mark, Ranger had taken control again and was trying to get Deacon in position to finish. His first 4 matches were stopped in rather short fashion, but Deacon was set on making Ranger work for this one by grabbing the face area the next chance he got. Sidney, neither Paul had seen a dog last longer than 20 minutes with Ranger, so they were treading in new water. Still pushing hard as he was at the beginning of the match, Ranger gave Deacon the mouth action he wanted. The gut-wrenching sound of teeth grinding together is all that could be heard as the dogs wrestled for the top position. That's when Ronald's cell phone vibrated in his pocket. It was his wife, Sabrina. With all the noise and people cheering for both dogs, Ronald never heard or felt his phone alert or saw he had 5 missed calls. Stepping away from the ring to call his wife, Ronald couldn't take his eyes off the bulldogs who were mangled together like 2 rattlesnakes fighting. "I was trying to reach you for the last hour. Where are you at? Little Ron had to be rushed to the hospital," Sabrina stated. "To the hospital? What happened?" Ronald asked. Standing in the front yard, he could hear the guys watching the fight getting louder and louder when Ronald returned to the ring, where Deacon was getting the bad end of an ear hold. Ranger kept a firm grip on Deacon's shortly cropped ears as he backpedaled from one side of the ring to the other. Immediately pulling Gerard aside, explaining what was going on with his son, Ronald expressed that he needed to get back to Myrtle Beach as soon as possible. Gerard knew they needed to leave, so he may be forced to pick Deacon up and take the loss. It's like the red dog from Mr. Mackelberry knew something was wrong because he managed to get Ranger off his ear as he barreled his muzzle deep into Ranger's chest. Growling as he dug deeper and deeper, the sound of bones breaking could be heard as Deacon broke Ranger's chest plate. "Finish that motherfucker, boy," Gerard yelled as Deacon continued to punish. "Put up 5 more grand if you think Ranger will quit and stop all the talking," Sidney said to Gerard as he continued to coach Deacon. "Man, you're bluffing. Stop all the cap and put your money where your mouth is," Larry said, as he pulled out a wad of cash standing beside Ronald on Deacon's side of the ring. "I'm tired of this dude talking. Let's see if he really want that smoke," Larry said to Gerard, as he laid on the floor of the ring, looking Deacon directly in his eyes. "Put him away, Deacon. Get it over with," Mr. Mackelberry blurted, as Ranger began to whimper. Paul Jacobs had a look of concern on his face, as Ranger began to whine every time Deacon would shake his powerful jaws. "You not gonna hold me to that bet, are you?" Sidney asked Larry as the boys from New York watched their champion of a dog body hang limp from Deacon's grip. "You fucking right I am. Pass that bread big, homie, Larry said to Sid as he held his hand out for payment. Chapter 11. The Investigation. While the guys were celebrating on the highway heading back to Horry County, Carl was in Myrtle Beach with Brian plotting his next move. And while they were scheming on the guys, Gerard's newly found girlfriend, Sarah, had other plans. She was a federal officer part of a special dogfighting unit that had been investigating Gerard's dogfighting circle for several years. Once Sarah volunteered to go undercover, it wasn't hard for her to follow him to the grocery store, meet him on the same aisle, and ask a question about a product, hoping he'd bite the bait and try to get her number. Sarah needed a little more proof that Gerard was connected to a group call, the society known for organizing dogfighting events up and down the East Coast. Having a reputation amongst her comrades of bringing in the big fish, Sarah just needed Gerard to admit his dealing, or someone that was willing to testify in court that he was involved with the society. By the time the guys reached Aner, Sarah had made it back to Gerard's house and had dinner prepared, but Ronald couldn't stay. He had to go directly to Grand Strand Hospital and check on his boy. Larry was dropped off back at the same spot he was picked up from. Gerard took Deacon to his chain spot as the smell of good Southern cooking reeked in the air. Grabbing her phone from the table, she quickly snapped several pictures of Gerard with the scarred Deacon as he was chaining him back out. Scarred was an understatement, to be real with it. The dog had gashes and bite marks from head to toe. And before Gerard entered the back door, Sarah had turned her phone off, putting it inside of her pocketbook. "Why did Ronald leave? I cooked enough for him too," she said as Gerard went to the bathroom to wash his hands. "Damn, what do you have in that pot? Oxtails?" Gerard asked as he walked back in the kitchen to caress Sarah. "How did you know?" was her response before looking into Gerard's eyes, giving him a kiss. "Move, let me finish," she continued as she went back to the stove area. After about an hour, Gerard received a call from Ronald, explaining that little Ronald was okay and back home. Telling Gerard his son desperately needed a heart transplant soon, Ronald said he and Larry would come through tomorrow so they could properly celebrate Deacon getting his second win and bringing home 20 grand total. Between his son fainting, having to be rushed to hospital, and Deacon winning against the New York Dog Ranger, for that moment, Ronald had completely forgotten about the madman Carl who was breathing down his neck. And that wasn't good. The next day came, and like Rowaneld said, he and Larry was meeting up with Gerard when Ronald noticed a blue, older model Ford Taurus following them, making every turn they made. "Yo, is it me, or is that car behind us, behind that white van, following us?" Ronald asked Larry as the light turned green and they drove through the intersection. Now on point, Larry looked through his side mirror to see the blue Ford tailing about 5 cars back. Ronald quickly explained the situation that happened with Carl and his wife Shamela stealing his dope. What he didn't know was the fact that his friend Jazz was dead in an abandoned house in Charleston. Ronald wasn't about the street shit. He didn't want any parts of Carl, but Larry made him pull over. "Fuck that nigga, we about to solve this problem right now," Larry said as he pulled a .357 from his waist, laying it on his lap. Soon as Ronald pulled off to the side of the street, Larry jumped out of the car with his gun hidden behind his leg. Seconds later, the blue Ford slowly pulled up beside Ronald's car, with the passenger window rolled down. Then suddenly the sound of thunder roared as a .357 hydro shock bullet from Larry's gun went supersonic. Shattering the back passenger window as Carl punched the gas, Larry continued to squeeze the ultralight trigger of his Smith & Wesson. "Yo, catch that motherfucker," Larry said as he jumped back in the car. But Ronald wasn't the one that would volunteer for the gangster shit. Seeing they were out of immediate danger, he hit a U-turn heading back towards Gerard's house. Arriving in the city of Aner about 25 minutes later, Ronald was clearly a little rattled up from the intense situation that had just unfolded. On the other end, it wasn't enough action for his counterpart Larry, who was making calls to his boys to find Carl. Still hyped off of his first encounter with the madman, Larry was speaking loud enough that Sarah could hear their conversation from the bedroom. Hoping she could catch one of the guys saying something incriminating, Sarah pushed the record button on a micro-size recorder she had on her keychain. And for the next 45 minutes, she uploaded everything that was said in the kitchen. Chapter 12. Time is ticking. Closer than the undercover unit has ever been to getting the dogfighting group called the Society. A seed was planted months before that may hinder their efforts. The one thing that never happened to Sarah in any of her past investigations was about to come to the light. She was getting a lot of pressure from the unit's chief, insisting it was time to make a move. But Sarah was catching feelings for Gerard. If the higher-ups in her department knew this, she would immediately be removed from the case. About 2 weeks had passed when the Charleston 10 News announced the findings of a decomposed John Doe male in an abandoned crack house. Gerard and Ronald never knew Carl took Jazz to Charleston when he kidnapped him, and they never heard anything from Jazz or his family again. Larry was spending so much time around the guys, he was starting to feel bad about stealing Gerard's dog Nina and robbing his deceased wife Erica. In fact, Larry had came up with a plan to steal Nina back from the guy Sal and return her to Gerard without him finding out. While the guys were in the back fooling around with the dogs, Sarah pulled into the driveway and walked to the backyard. "Damn, I feel like I saw you somewhere before," Larry said to Sarah as she came closer. "Well, the saying is, we all have a twin out there somewhere," she responded. Quickly changing the subject, Sarah walked over to Gerard's pride and joy and thought it would be the best time to ask him about the wounds and scars on Deacon. That's when it happened. Ronald got the call that his son had another episode in which he was rushed back to the hospital, so he had to leave, taking Larry with him. Before Ronald's car was out of sight, Sarah popped the big question to Gerard. "What happened to Deacon? Why is he so scarred?" "He didn't look like this when I first met you," Sarah finished off saying. Thinking fast, Gerard responded, "We were trying to breed him and they started fighting." Walking back towards the house, Gerard had little to say, and Sarah was afraid too much questioning would seem suspicious. So she let it go and went inside as well. Later that evening, Gerard received a call from his cousin Sean, a.k.a. Shaq, who lived in Memphis, Tennessee. He hadn't seen his cuz from the Carolinas in a couple years, so he had to contact Gerard, letting him know he was in town for the weekend. Hearing this, Gerard knew the hot stove was about to catch fire. The last time Shaq was in town, Gerard had to bail him out of jail for assault and battery with the intent to kill. Not to mention he was a wannabe pimp. Stay tuned for the final part of The Top Dog. This will be an ending you don't want to miss. Chapter 13. The Decision. "Bitch, where the fuck you put my shit?" Carl yelled as he hit his wife Shamela with a close fist. Unable to leave the house, Shamela was about ready to tell Carl where she hid his heroin. To make sure she stayed put, Carl had someone to stay at the crib with Shamela while he was out and about. She had been beaten on and off for so many weeks she would probably be unrecognizable to Gerard. Even after being hit like a man, even after being forced to have sex, even after having an AK-47 stuck in her mouth, she maintained the same stance, claiming she didn't have or know where Carl's package was at. "After all the shit I did for your unappreciative ass for you to bite the hand that fed you," Carl stated before kicking Shamela in the chest, knocking her to the floor. As his what looks to be ex-wife gasped for air on the cold oak wood, Carl looked at his partner Grip, who was sitting in the living room area, giving him the word. "Yo, I'm tired of talking. Give this bitch what she wants," Carl said, instructing Grip to have his way with Shamela. Carl was a savage, and it didn't bother him to watch her get manhandled and raped. In fact, he rolled up several blunts while sitting on the kitchen counter as Grip aggressively took what belonged to her. Later that evening, Carl had a few things to do, so he had Grip to stay a watch his wife. One of Shamela's eyes was closed shut from the beating she took. Her left arm had went numb weeks ago, so at the point it was useless. Looking at the ceiling from the floor as she balled herself up in a corner of the room, Shamela knew she had to make a move and make it fast. It was common sense that Carl wouldn't be letting her go, and she would be eventually killed. Mouth dry, desperately needing something to drink, Shamela asked Grip for a glass of water. "Dumb bitch, you don't need any water. You need to come up with Carl's dope," Grip uttered as he passed her the glass. Drinking the first cup down immediately, Shamela asked for another. Grip handed her the glass, then went back to the living room where he continued to play the Xbox. The water she was drinking came straight from the tap, but at that moment it was the best water she had ever drunken. Shamela knew Carl would be back soon, so she gathered her strength before speaking out to Grip. "I'm going to the bathroom if that's okay with you." Stopping in the middle of his game, Grip got up from the sofa to follow her. "Damn, I can't even take a piss by myself," Shamela said under her breath as she slowly got up from the floor. Walking down the hallway as Grip followed closely behind, Shamela reached the threshold of the bathroom, and all hell broke loose. She hit Grip in the face, flush with the glass, which caused him to fall backwards into the hallway. And the impact from hitting the floor made Grip's gun fall from his waist into the hallway as well. Seeing this, she knew this was her chance to get away. Going off of survival fuel, Shamela jumped across Grip, reaching the high-point .45 caliber pistol before he could get to his feet. "You punk-ass little dick, nigga. You could have been something in life," she said as she squeezed the trigger, repeatedly putting burning, hot lead in Grip's chest. Unsatisfied, she walked over him as he gasped for air. "Come on, Grip, this is your chance. I want to fuck bad, and I want you my nigga," she said before emptying the clip of the gun in her hand in Grip's face. Only able to see out of one eye, Shamela left Grip in the hallway as she made her escape. Back in an undisclosed location in eastern South Carolina, Gerard's girlfriend Sarah was at work at the federal headquarters building. Her unit was summoned for a mandatory meeting to discuss their progress for Operation Bloodline. The chief was getting aggravated, claiming Sarah wasn't moving fast enough, and even threatened to take her off the case. He also let Sarah know they had enough to make their arrest now, but needed more evidence to seal the deal. She assured the chief it wouldn't be much longer, but Gerard wasn't as easy as he was making him out to be. While Sarah was making plans to shut down the society, her man Gerard was out in Myrtle Beach shopping with his cousin Shaq, Ronald, and Larry. And check this out. Gerard was using money he got from Sarah. She was a very independent lady, so she didn't mind spending money on him. When Gerard finally came home that evening, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table with tears ran down her face. Clearly seeing her stress, Gerard blurted out, "Did that nigga Carl come by here?" "Carl? Who's Carl?" Sarah asked while keeping her head buried in her hands. "Never mind, I don't know what I was thinking," Gerard responded as he changed the subject. Gerard, please. I have a headache," she stated, cutting him off mid-sentence. Then she simply said, "Gerard, I'm pregnant." Chapter 14, 25 kilos. Knowing she could have went straight to the police station to report everything Carl did to her over the past month, Shamela stayed away from the law enforcement. She had other plans. After losing one of her best friends, Kayla, Shamela vowed that one day she would return the favor to Carl. She knew it was inevitable if Carl was living. She would have to leave town in order to have any type peace. But what she didn't know was that Carl was getting pressure from the higher-ups about the missing drugs he was given on consignment. Several weeks later, up in Horry County, Gerard was getting mixed feelings from his old lady Sarah. Clearly excited about his first child, Gerard received a little pushback from Sarah, claiming she wasn't expecting, nor was she ready to have kids at the moment. At the same time, Sarah had crossed the line being an FBI agent and developing genuine feelings for Gerard. She was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Her professional career as an agent in that division was in jeopardy. But on the other hand, she was starting to feel like she really found love, especially after being in multiple abusive relationships. One Thursday after getting off work, Gerard was watering up the dogs when Sarah walked out in the back. "We need to talk," she said with a rather awkward look on her face. She was leaning towards having an abortion, but she knew Gerard wouldn't agree. She had to make a decision before she began to show any signs of being pregnant around her co-workers. That's when Gerard's cell phone rung. When he answered, the excitement in the voice on the other end of the line was filled with joy. "They got a heart for my boy. He's got a date for his transplant," Ronald said. "That's great," was Gerard's response as Sarah stood in front of him. "I'm heading your way after I pick up Larry and a bottle of wine, plus them boys call me with the Freddy dog. I need to holla at you," Ronald stated before hanging up. It wasn't even 10 minutes after hanging up the phone with Ronald did an unfamiliar car pulled into Gerard's driveway. Still in the backyard with Sarah as he finished up with the dogs, Gerard had an unexpected guest. It was Shamela, and boy was she looking good. "Hey man, we need to talk," Shamela said. Sarah immediately looked at Gerard and he looked at Shamela. "We'll talk later," Sarah said before walking off with an attitude back into the house. "Where the hell were you at all this time?" Gerard asked, as Shamela came close enough for him to smell the sweet, seductive, peachy fragrance she had on. "I need your help with something. I'm serious," she said. "Let me guess. You have the dope that your crazy-ass husband has been trying to kill us over?" "I don't want any parts of that shit. I mean, I'm glad you're okay, but you should have told me that up front." "I have a suitcase full of bricks in the car," Shamela responded before pulling her phone out, making a quick call. It wasn't long before Gerard heard another car door close. "Do you have someone with you?" he asked. Then coming from the front yard was his ex-wife Erica's Aunt Darlene, carrying a black suitcase. Neither of the ladies knew Sarah, but things were about to get interested because Shamela wanted to stash the suitcase at Gerard's place. Gerard quickly took the heavy luggage bag in the house. Pulling the ladies up 2 chairs, they sat in the backyard for hours, as Shamela told Gerard every single thing Carl did to her. She insisted she would have never in a million years took anything from any man she ever had, but Carl wouldn't stop beating her when he got drunk. She continued saying even that wasn't enough, because she loved him. But when she came home from work, to find him fucking another girl in her bed, that was the last straw. Shamela explained how she waited for Carl to take a trip with his boys and took the suitcase out of the bedroom closet. When Shamela started to talk about how Carl ran her and Kayla off the road, she began to cry. You could hear the pain and sorrow in her voice as she gave her best recollection of what happened. While the 3 were sitting around the barrel fire, Sarah was inside the house letting her jealous emotions get the best of her before checking the suitcase. Gerard put under his bed. Barely able to drag it, Sarah pulled it out far enough to unzip it and take a peek inside. "Sarah, I want to introduce you to someone," Gerard said as he walked in the back door. Quickly pushing the bag back under his bed, Sarah got up, hurrying back to the kitchen. "Oh, you scared me," she said, as they bumped into each other in the hallway. "What did you want to talk to me about?" Gerard asked, with Sarah saying it could wait until later as they walk out the back into the yard where the ladies were sitting. When the night was over, Shamela and her Aunt Darlene left the suitcase with Gerard and went back to their hotel in Myrtle Beach. Chapter 15. It ain't over till it's over. The next morning, about 8:30, Ronald pulled up at Gerard's house, and he had a lot to talk about. Rightfully overly joyed, Ronald said his son would go in for his first appointment in a week as they got prepped for surgery. Speaking loud enough to be heard in the bedroom, Sarah woke as Ronald switched the subject, telling Gerard the guys that had the Freddy dog wanted a piece of Deacon, being his name was starting to ring. Not even thinking about Sarah in the back room, Gerard indulged deeper into the conversation, being Freddy had killed his #1 dog, Rex, a while ago. Having to leave for work, Sarah got herself together and left Gerard and Ronald in the kitchen, talking about Deacon and Freddy. Having Deacon now, Gerard felt like Freddy would be the perfect dog to make Champion off. He had a genuine hate for Freddy and was set on getting revenge from the moment Ronald mentioned his name. This would be a match organized by the society. Freddy was the heart of North Carolina. When he was in the box, he brought crowds like no other. Anybody who saw Freddy go was willing to bet the house on him. Even the ladies loved Freddy. Pulling out his cell phone, Ronald called up Harrison, who was the owner of Freddy and the guy who'd be considered the head of the society. Harrison was cool with both Gerard and Ronald, so he was ready to make a date for that action. Gerard had confidence in Deacon, but he knew this would be a match for the ages. Ronald was still talking to Harrison on the phone when someone knocked at the door. Looking through the peephole, Gerard could see his crazy ass, Cousin Shaq, standing on the porch. "Come on in, cuz," Gerard said as he opened the door. "Big Ronald, what up, boy?" Shaq blurted as he walked into the kitchen area. Still conversing with Harrison, Ronald shook Shaq's hand while giving him a hug and went back to his conversation with Freddy's owner. Taking a seat in the living room, Gerard and Shaq decided to catch up on lost time. Even though it had been a minute since he laid eyes on the fool, Gerard explained his situation with Carl. He never told Shaq anything about Shamela bringing the suitcase full of dope to his house. But there was one thing Shaq didn't like, and it was for people to play fuckboy games with his family. By the time Ronald was off the call with Harrison, Shaq was ready to plot an attack on Carl to finish him off. He was on a different kind of time. Shaq was the family joker. He clowned a lot, but when it was time to get serious, he didn't have a problem standing in the gun smoke. "Man, my stomach is growling. Let's go get something to eat," Shaq insisted. "We good, 'cause believe me. What, you need a gun or something?" he continued while flashing the 9mm on his waist. Leaving Aina riding back to Myrtle Beach, the fellas picked up Larry and went out on the town to get their grub on. Shaq never met Larry before, but from the time Larry got inside the car, Shaq knew he was his kind of man. Both guys sitting in the back of Gerard's vehicle were live wires. But unlike Larry, Shaq never had a run-in with Carl yet. Even though Shaq was a fool with that steel, Shamela's husband was a fucking maniac. While the guys were out enjoying themselves, Sarah was at work in the chief's office signing some documents that would seal the dogfighting case against the society. Tired of waiting on her, the Chief Johnson decided he would go with the evidence they already had against the group. He didn't have anything solid on Jarrod, but the same couldn't be said for their boy from North Carolina, Harrison, with the Freddy dog, because his phone was tapped for several weeks. Later the evening, after pulling a 10-hour shift, Sarah's mind was racing faster than Dale Earnhardt coming in on the final stretch as she headed to Gerard House. She had just saw a suitcase full of what looked to be duct-taped wrapped drugs under her boyfriend's bed. She wanted to have the baby for Gerard, but she couldn't risk her career and possibly her freedom. She had no excuse for Gerard outside of she just wasn't ready for a child yet. And with him not having a clue, his girlfriend was a Fed. Gerard wouldn't understand. When Sarah arrived in Aner, Gerard wasn't home, so she went inside, going straight to the room to look under the bed again. This time the suitcase was gone. She checked all the closets in all the rooms, but it was nowhere to be found. While things were becoming more confusing to Sarah, Carl was just getting back into South Carolina with some new guns from West Virginia. His plan was to go by Gerard's house and catch Wreck, but Carl's connection was more focused on getting their money or dope back, so they insisted he take a different angle. Making call after call to people who could help, Carl soon came to the realization that Shamela had left town. The next place he went was Shamela's Aunt Darlene's crib to find out she hadn't been home in weeks. That's when he finally started to worry. He knew if Darlene was with Shamela, he would never see his dope again. Back when Darlene was younger, she was rolling with some heavy hitters and even did a prison stint after shooting someone in the back. What Carl didn't know was Darlene was in Myrtle Beach, having a hell of a time with Gerard's cousin Shaq. But when Brian, that gave up jazz for paper bag money, told him he saw Gerard with some girls and few guys riding through the city, Carl gathered the straps. Shit was about to go down, but not like expected. Earlier that day, Gerard had moved the suitcase full of dope from under the bed, not feeling comfortable with that much shit laying around his house. So while Sarah was at work, he hid it in the storage room in the backyard. Chapter 16. The traitor word was starting to get around the city on how Brian set up jazz for the Charleston boys. As many people show him love, the same give him mean looks and stares. The paranoid type Brian stayed close to his crib until Carl arrived. On the other side of town, Ronald was making preparations for his only son, little Ronald's surgery. The date was coincidentally 2 days before the match, with Deacon and Freddie was to take place. Needless to say, this was the happiest Ronald's been in a very long time. He was finally starting to feel like he could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Married to Sabrina for 7 years, Ronald had the kind of woman a lot of men would die for. She was a classy, strong, smart, independent, caring, a little on the chubby side, but Sabrina had prettiest smile God ever laid on a woman. There's nothing like a natural woman. Real lashes, real thick hips, no BBLE, one that respects herself and her man. She met Ronald while they were going to Clemson University, and they haven't separated since. Little Ronald knew the doctors were going to make him feel better, but he didn't fully understand the seriousness of the situation. The 4-soon-to-be 5-year-old was ready to get his new heart in time for him to start kindergarten. Ronald and Gerard's more recently acquired friend Larry was beginning to feel a sense of loyalty to the pair. And just like he was thinking, Larry went back to the guy. Sal, he sold Gerard's prize, female dog Nina, with intents of returning her. But instead of stealing her back, Larry gave Sal $2,500 and left with the brood bitch in his back seat. After telling Ronald to find out Gerard and Shaq was at his place, Larry quickly dropped Nina back off in Ainor where he stole her from and joined the guys in Myrtle Beach. Coming back in town from a Wilmington, North Carolina drug raid, Sarah had to stop by the main office to attend another unit meeting. When she arrived, the chief had plans for the first waves of arrest involving the society laid out on the table. With the wiretaps they had on Harrison's phone, they were able to document Freddie's upcoming match. But for some reason, the chief knew Harrison had locked Freddie in for a fight with someone from South Carolina, but there wasn't a finger pointing at Gerard. Sarah never mentioned anything about the suitcase she saw under Gerard's bed either. It was starting to get harder to hide her stomach. So if the person she was so deeply in love with could be in the clear for the dogfighting bust, they could have a possible future together. Back in Myrtle Beach, Shamella's Aunt Darlene had Shaq and Larry to ride with her to check on a sale for the entire load of heroin. Although she had been out of the dope game for many years, she stayed connected to some old players that didn't mess around in the front streets. Once they finally made it to the Red Lobster agreed upon, Darlene pulled up beside a silver new model Lexus and exited the vehicle. The windows were too dark for any of the guys to see through. But when she got to the passenger side of the car, the window rolled down. "Okay, she good," Shaq said to Larry, seeing a smile on her face before she grabbed the handle and got inside. Only staying about 10 minutes, Darlene exited the exotic Lexus, getting back into the car with the fellas. Neither Shaq or Larry knew the amount of heroin Darlene was trying to sell. She was game to the foolishness. And although there seemed to be something there between her and Shaq, she didn't trust either one of them on that level. On the way back, Darlene called Shamella, trying to tell her to get ready to go get the load from Gerard's house, but she didn't answer. After trying several more times with no answer, panic began to sit in. The first thing that came to her mind was Carl. Then suddenly Darlene's celly rung. It was her niece explaining she walked inside the station to pay for gas and left her phone in the car. Shamella was a little iffy about making an even exchange for the dope, being it was so much, and she didn't know her aunt's connection. Not to mention they were ladies and didn't want to be underestimated. She was leaning towards getting half the money up front, and Darlene felt that may be a good idea as well. Going back to Ainor after dropping Larry back off at Ronald's place, Gerard rode by himself to get the suitcase, which was inside his storage room. When he made it home, Sarah's car was in the driveway, but he didn't stop inside the house. He jumped straight out his whip, heading to the backyard. Before he could get back to his ride, Sarah stuck her head out the back door. "Baby, I need to speak to you about something when you get a second," she said, as Gerard kept walking to the front. Sarah could clearly see he was carrying the same suitcase she saw under the bed that night. By the time she got to the front door, he was backing out the driveway. This pissed Sarah off big time, knowing she could have called her chief the moment she saw the bag under the bed, and Gerard would have been in jail for the rest of his life. Traffic was back up, so it took Gerard longer than normal to reach Myrtle Beach. Shamella had him to meet them back at the Sheraton Hotel where they were staying, so they could take half of the dope out, until they were 100% sure nothing funny was going down. Meanwhile, Sarah was sitting by the phone contemplating if she should call her chief and get Gerard pulled on Highway 501 with the suitcase. Luckily for him, he was in the elevator going to room 707. Unknowingly, in the same city at the same time, Carl had just arrived to Brian's crib. "Boy, oh boy. I'm glad you made it, man. Shit getting hot around here," Brian said as Carl came inside. "What's going on, C? Are you okay, dog?" Brian quickly asked. Being Carl was rather quiet. "Yeah, I'm straight Bubba, but I gotta find that dope or they," Carl said before stopping in mid-sentence. Hearing Brian talk about how the word had spread around town about Jazz, Carl thought it would be smart to leave his house, so they went to a bar in North Myrtle Beach. Only staying long enough to have a few drinks, Carl was taking Brian back home when he made a quick right turn onto a dark street. "Where are you going, nigga, to one of your girls' cribs or something?" Brian asked as the alcohol from the club was beginning to kick in. Carl didn't respond but kept looking forward as he continued to drive down the low-lighted one-way street. "Do you have your phone? I need to make a call," Carl asked while yielding off to the right, going back towards the main highway. Then, without notice, Carl pulled a nickel-plated snub-nose Rossi 38 from his pocket and shot him 3 times in the chest and neck area. Before he knew whether he was dead or alive, Carl opened the door doing 35 miles per hour, pushing Brian out the vehicle. On the south side of Myrtle Beach, sitting in Pier 85 parking lot, Darlene was beginning to get a little impatient when the same silver Lexus pulled into the parking lot. "There they go right there," Shaq said as they watched the car park. A few moments later, the driver's door opened. "Damn boy," Jarrod stated while looking at Shaq with a smirk on his face. Nobody sitting in the car knew that Darlene's buyer was a woman. She must be coming to check the dopey for her man. Jarrod said before Darlene cut him off, saying, "Nah, playboy, get used to it. It's a woman's world." Seeing everything was official, the exchange was made and the deal was done. Shamela had just scored over $250,000 cash straight profit. Chapter 17. Consequences. Riding around with spots of Brian's clotted blood tissue in the passenger seat, Carl was on the move. Little did he know his heroin was long gone now, and with Shamela giving her Aunt Darlene half the cash and the fellas about 50 grand together for them to split, Carl would be lucky to get $100 back. Once they had accomplished their ultimate goal, Darlene instead, she was going back home and could careless about Carl, especially since her new friend Jarrod's cousin Shaq would be spending more time around her place. Shamela wanted to buy a house closer to Jarrod. Darlene never found out about her niece's love affair, and Shamela kept it that way. Several weeks had went by, and the match between Deacon and the North Carolina dog, Freddie, was days away. Not only was 2 of the best dogs in the Carolinas about to face off, but Ronald Day was approaching for his son to get his heart transplant. In North Carolina, Harrison had several people put up side money totaling 25 grand, not including the pot. Winning 6 already, Freddie seemed to be an unbeatable dog. Even though they knew the North Carolina hound was a killer, Jarrod and Ronald felt like Deacon was an ace. And between them, Larry and Mr. McKelberry, the South Carolina boys had about 37 grand to bet on the side. Taking some of the cash he got from Shamela, Jarrod decided to take Sarah to the casino boat in Little River, South Carolina. In the doghouse with his old lady, Jarrod made sure Sarah had an unbelievable night on the ocean. While they were out on the Atlantic, Carl was pulling in Jarrod's driveway back in Aner. He was getting desperate and willing to do just about anything at this point to find his dope. Seeing no one was home, he walked to the backside. Soon as he walked up the steps, the Charleston native pulled his F&N from his waist and kicked the door hard enough to enter the house. Wearing gloves and a black ski mask, Carl started from the bedroom and worked his way back to the kitchen. He searched the house up and down, finding many things of value, but nothing that looked like his heroin. He needed to find Shamela, and he needed to do it fast. So Carl gave the house one last search before leaving just as he came. When Jarrod and Sarah returned from their lovely night on the boat, Jarrod noticed the lights were on inside the house and he left them all turned off. "Hold up, baby, something isn't right. Someone been in the house," he stated before getting out of his car, with his gun in his hand. Realizing the front was still locked, he walked around to the back to see the door still open. Sarah was still inside the vehicle in the driveway as Gerard slowly entered his own house with caution. Once he knew the house was clear, Gerard rushed to the kennels to see if any dogs were stolen. "Damn," he said with relief. Seeing all the dogs in place, including Nina, the dog Larry dropped back off. When it came to her, Gerard never knew who brought her back, and he never tried to find out. He was just happy she was back home. While Sarah and Gerard were cleaning up the mess Carl made, Shamela was in Marion, South Carolina, enjoying the first couple weeks in her new house when someone knocked on the door. Nobody knew about this house, but Gerard and she knew he was with Sarah. Before she could get off the long chair, the person on the outside knocked on the door even harder. Shamela was going to get her 380 off the counter when it happened. Sounding like a bomb just as someone kicked the door clean open, Shamela found herself looking down the barrel of a DEA agent's Glock. "Get the fuck on the floor," one officer said as he rushed to the back. Her house was being raided by 3 different law enforcement agencies. But when Shamela saw the same lady that Darlene sold the load of heroin to walk through the door, she knew she was screwed. "Where's your aunt? We went by her house, but she apparently moved," the lady known to her as Glinda asked. Shamela was stunned and speechless as she was walked out the house in cuffs and put in the back seat of an unmarked vehicle. About 20 minutes later, Glinda, aka Agent Dawson, came out the front with the rest of the cash. Shamela had stashed from the dope deal. Making sure they had all they needed, DEA drove off with Shamela into the night. Chapter 18. Showtime. Bright and early that morning, Gerard was out in the backyard having one last talk with his dog Deacon. This match was more than just a match for Gerard, since Freddy was the dog that killed his top hound Rex. It wasn't about the money. This was a revenge play where his pride was on the line. This was for all the glory, all the marbles, and Gerard felt he had the perfect pit bull for the occasion. Waiting on Ronald and Larry to arrive, Gerard took Deacon off of his chain and put him in a kennel crate he had inside of the house to keep him cool and rested. In Augusta, Mr. McElberry and his boys were setting up the box where the great battle would take place. The boys in North Carolina loaded Freddy up and headed to South Carolina, 4 carloads deep. It was about to go down. Everything was moving so fast, nobody realized or had a clue Shamela was in custody. Her Aunt Darlene had gotten the word that the police came to her house, so she never returned. Trying to call her niece several times only to get the operator, Darlene knew she had to get low. With Gerard's cousin Shaq by her side and over $100,000 in cash in her possession, Darlene left town heading to California. Back in Myrtle Beach, Carl was still on the prowl. Using an address he got from Brian days before he murdered him, Carl's new target was Ronald's house, and although he was what most would consider a serial killer, everything was beginning to take its toll on Carl. He was mentally drained, making decisions he wouldn't normally make. Sabrina and little Ronald were at the hospital, he had to be there a day before surgery. So with big Ronald with Gerard, Carl sat in a cut not far from his house for hours, but no one showed up. Miles away in Columbia, South Carolina, Sarah and the rest of her unit were gearing up for Operation Bloodline. The chief had someone put a tracking device under Harrison's vehicle days before he was set to leave, so they had a precise location of the North Carolina motorcade heading south to Augusta. In Sarah's mind, Gerard was supposed to be home or out with his friends in Myrtle Beach. She knew of Mr. McElberry in Augusta, but she didn't know his property would be the target of the raid. On Interstate 20, about an hour away from the match site, Ronald's car started to overheat, so they pulled over to find a service station. He had a busted radiator, so it would be at least 2 hours before they would be back on the highway. And after calling Mr. McElberry, letting him know they would be late, the old man decided to change to match location to the same wooded area of Deacon's last fight. Even with the 2-hour delay, Gerard would be landing in Augusta about an hour after Harrison. Ronald's wife Sabrina kept him informed with any info the doctors gave her, being she knew he would be there as soon as the match was over. Little Ronald wasn't due for his surgery until 6 p.m. the next day, so she wasn't worried about his dad not being there. Sabrina was a God-fearing woman who believed the family that prays together stays together. All the way on the west coast, Darlene and Shaq were enjoying the beautiful weather and mesmerizing horizon of the Pacific Ocean. She had no plans to get settled, and in fact she wanted to leave America, knowing the DEA wouldn't stop looking for her. And if she left, that meant she would be leaving by herself, because Shaq said California was unexpected, but he couldn't leave his family in Memphis behind. Feeling like her past was coming back to haunt her, Darlene purchased a throwaway phone in which she tried to reach Shamela several more times. But just like each time before, it went straight to the operator. Meanwhile, in Augusta, South Carolina, Sarah was putting on her bulletproof vest. 7 unmarked cars, 2 paddy wagons, and 15 regular patrol units waited patiently for the go call in the parking lot of Walmart. The chief had the address of the match documented, since the beacon stopped moving 30 minutes now. At the site of the show, Mr. McElberry was trying to call Gerard, but no one picked up. Everyone was waiting on the guys to get there with Deacon. Harrison was giving Freddie his final walk to empty him out. There was a crowd of about 30 people, with a majority betting on Freddie. "Don't tell me them boys got scared. Where my man with the forfeit money?" Harrison asked. A number of women were around the wooden square waiting to see what was expected to be the best show this year. On Interstate 20, the fellas had other problems to worry about. Not even 10 minutes after getting Ronald's radiator fixed, they got pulled over by a state trooper. And since Larry had just lit up a blunt of moon rock, the state trooper had all the right to have them detained on the back of his patrol unit. Plus, the fact that Larry was being a smart aleck with the officer didn't make it any better. Gerard could see Mr. McElberry calling, but he couldn't answer. The state trooper that pulled them over was one of those asshole cops you never wanted behind you reading your tags. So he didn't mind taking his slow time to search Ronald's vehicle. There was nothing to find, because that was the last blunt Larry had until he got to Augusta. But the odor from the moon rock was so strong, the officer just knew something was in the car. He even had the K9 unit pull up on the scene and do another search. While the fellas were being treated like criminals on the highway, Sarah and her unit had just got the signal to execute the raid. "Let's go, let's go, let's go," the chief said over the CB as the vehicles began leaving the Walmart parking lot. They were only about 1 mile from the property and closing in fast. Getting impatient and worried, Mr. McElberry called Gerard once more as he took a leak behind a shed on the far side of the property. Before he could put his phone back in his pocket, Mr. McElberry heard someone from the front side yell out, "Police! Police!" Running to the edge of the small building, Mr. McElberry could see a long line of police vehicles and unmarked cars coming down the one-way road that led to the property. He immediately darted off into the woods and was moving pretty fast for an old man. Jumping out of a black Suburban, Sarah aimed her pistol at a group of about 3, commanding them to get on the ground. People were running from all areas of the property, trying to make their escape. Leaving Freddie next to a bucket of soapy water, Harrison tried to get away but was tackled by an officer. In fact, out of everyone that was there, only 10 people got away from the scene, one being Mr. McElberry, who was still running through the woods. Being from that area, the old man knew how far he had to go to reach safety. Finally, after being released from the side of the highway, Gerard called Mr. McElberry to let him know they would be there shortly. Having to call twice, the old man soon answered. He was out of breath, and Gerard could barely understand what he was trying to say, but he did clearly hear Mr. McElberry say, "Man, the fucking police hit the spot." The guys were about 10 minutes away from Augusta when Ronald hit a U-turn heading back north to Horry County. Chapter 19. The Predator. After dropping Gerard and Larry off home, it was about 10 p.m. before Ronald reached Myrtle Beach. He had to grab a few things before going to the hospital, where his family was waiting, so he made quick trip to his house. When he pulled in the yard, Ronald received a text from Sabrina, asking how much longer would he be, to which he responded about 15 minutes. Soon as he attempted to exit his vehicle, Ronald was hit in the head from behind and knocked to the ground. "Yeah, nigga, I waited all day for your ass," Carl said as he cocked the hammer back on his pistol. On the ground, terrified, Ronald covered his face as Carl aimed his gun. "All you had to do was up my shit," Carl blurted, before running off, leaving Ronald's limp body laying in the front yard. Getting dragged by Carl to the bushes beside his house made it incredibly hard for anyone walking and passing by to discover the body. Sabrina continued to text and eventually called his phone but got no answer. Luckily, the following morning, someone saw his body near the shrubs and called the police. Not leaving the hospital to hear any of the local hood news, Sabrina was pissed off at Ronald, thinking he was really going to miss his son's surgery. Getting emotional as tears began to roll down his face, little Ronald told his mom he was scared, being his dad was his protector. So while his boy was getting an IV in his arm, Ronald was being rolled out of his yard on a stretcher under a white sheet. It wasn't until the that afternoon news, when Anchor spoke of his homicide, did Gerard and Sabrina find out what happened. Larry flipped when he got the news, crying like a baby as he dropped the phone out of his hand. He was ready to kill any and everybody until someone gave some answers. Gerard called his cousin Shaq and Darlene, informing them what happened as well. It was a very sad day for the crew, and truthfully, it didn't feel real. The police had no idea who killed Ronald, assuming it was a robbery gone wrong. Shaq wanted to come back, but Darlene wouldn't let him. Instead, she convinced him to get his passport, and they left the country heading to Mexico City. Mexico. Sarah had decided to keep her baby and continue to grow with Gerard. She eventually put in her 2 weeks and left the force to be a correction officer at J. Reuben Long Detention Center in Conway. Mr. McElberry got away clean and ended up meeting a lady he took liking to. But when he found out Gerard and Sarah had date to be married, the 70-year-old man had it arranged to have a double wedding. Shamela pled guilty to distribution of heroin and is currently waiting on her sentence in the Florence County Jail. Glinda, aka Agent Dawson, received a promotion for the undercover work she did over several years, which netted $10 million in drugs. What Darlene didn't know was a few years after she was sent to prison back in the days, her friend Glinda Dawson decided she wanted to go into the law enforcement field. The guy Harrison from North Carolina pleaded guilty, admitting he was a part of the dogfighting group called the Society. He received 1 year in jail, followed by 10 years of probation. His pride and joy, Freddie, was euthanized. His name was mentioned in many stories told under the trees of North Carolina. Once he got himself together, Larry vowed he would find Carl one day. Before he met Ronald and Gerard, Larry was heading for prison or the graveyard. He would often visit Ronald's gravesite with a bottle of expensive liquor and sit for hours. Things just weren't the same anymore. 10 years later, "Go boy! Go boy!" Sabrina yelled, just as everyone in the Myrtle Beach Seahawks gym erupted in celebration. Little Ronald, 15 now, had just scored the winning bucket in the varsity 4A championship game. Rightfully bragging as she ran to the floor, Sabrina was followed by Gerard, his wife Sarah, and their daughter Jane. The whole crew was there supporting their godson. Unlike everyone else who sat in the bleachers during the game, Larry had courtside view. He had a part-time job as the high school security guard, so he always had extra tickets to the school activities. Unfortunately, Mr. McElberry had passed away 3 years after getting married, but his wife Helen was there to show her support. Helen would always hear her husband tell stories of when the guys would come visit. As hundreds of people began pouring out of the exit doors into the parking lot, Gerard noticed a dark blue Maserati parked beside the away team's bus with the headlights on. Admiring the exotic vehicle as he walked past, Gerard saw a male stick their arm out of the driver's side window. "Damn fam, you just gonna walk past your people like that?" someone said, causing Gerard to go back towards the car. "Oh shit, nigga, get out here and give me a hug," Gerard said, as he realized it was his cousin Shaq without Darlene. And get this, he had his 4 daughters all born in Mexico, ages 8, 6, 3, and one that just turned a year old, 2 weeks before sitting in the back seat. "Man, hold on. I'm going to find Larry. He's over there by the exit somewhere," Gerard said to Shaq as he ran back towards the gymnasium. As soon as Larry got word that Shaq was on the other side of the parking lot, he rushed over with his share of hugs and daps. Getting his kids out of the car, Shaq, along with Gerard and Larry, went over to congratulate little Ronald and his team on their hard win against the #1 team in the state. The spitting image of his daddy. Little Ronald had a gift when it came to basketball. He was recruited when he was in the 8th grade by the varsity head coach. Even he could see little Ronald wasn't average. While the guys were reminiscing about the good old days, the gates had just swung open at a South Carolina federal work release camp. It was the day Shamela had been waiting on for many years. She was finally free as a bird in the bright blue sky. Her Aunt Darlene, who had changed her identity to Mary Ann Drayton, had someone to pick Shamela up from the gates in a wine-color Ferrari. After explaining to her niece that they had to ride back to Myrtle Beach to meet back up with her family, Shamela was ready to ride. Not even an hour after being released, the ladies were shifting gears, riding top-down hare in the wind heading to Horry County. And for those who are wondering what happened to Carl, well, he died from a freak accident after he choked on a piece of candy while having sex with another man.